Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. The Tough Girl podcast is sponsorship and ad-free, and that's thanks to the monthly financial support of patrons. To find out more about supporting your favourite podcast and becoming a patron, please do check out Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast. There's currently over 220 patrons who are supporting the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media. Take action now and become one of them. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website. And if you sign up at the $5 level and you are female, you can come and join the Tough Girl Tribe, a closed Facebook community that I run. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Krystle Wright, a semi-nomadic adventure sports photographer.
Hi, I'm Krystle Wright. I work as an adventure sports photographer and also director. And even though I'm originally from the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia, I spend roughly about 11 months on the road each year. And so if you can imagine, this year, I've only spent 9 days at home. It's a little unique, this lifestyle, you could say.
Very unique and very interesting. So did you grow up sort of nomadically? Were you traveling a lot when you were younger? Where do you think this love of traveling came from?
No, I actually had quite the opposite childhood. I was very much stationary. I grew up on the Sunshine Coast, and it was definitely quite an incredible place to grow up in. And my love of travel, I'm not sure where that stemmed from. My brother and I have certainly always been quite adventurous, and my sister too, but she's now raising a family in New Zealand, so she's certainly slowed down. But I guess perhaps it's from the love of National Geographic and being completely entranced as I looked through the pages as a kid growing up. I just always had this natural curiosity. And even the thing is, even if when I turned 18, and of course I could have just taken off and started traveling then, I really didn't have the money. And I knew that if I didn't go to university straight away, that I was never going to go. And I decided, well, I need to actually stay put, start building my career as a photographer. And I'm sure the travel will come later.
Where did your love of photography come from?
As a teenager, I always had a Kodak disposable camera in hand, and every camping trip I would take, I would always have a panoramic Kodak disposable camera. Now that I think about it, I was always a copycat of my sister. Her being the older one, I always thought it was so cool to copy everything she did. And then to be the pesky little sister, I wanted to beat her at everything. And so she was definitely a huge role model for me growing up. And I would see her take these disposable cameras on camp, and I would do the same thing. And I loved that process. I absolutely loved, on a 5-day trip, I would break down the roll of film and go, right, today I'm allowed to take 5 photos. And tomorrow I'm allowed to take 6 photos. And of course, some days I would take more photos and realize, well, tomorrow I'm only allowed to take 3 photos. And that was really the beginning of my love for photography.
It sounds like you managed to go sort of hiking and camping when you were growing up as a child. Was the outdoors like a big part of your life even then?
Oh, absolutely. My brother, sister, and I, we grew up on a property. It wasn't that far away. Like, we weren't super rural, but we certainly weren't in town. And I remember being very jealous of kids who grew up in town, because I always thought they could all visit each other whenever they wanted, which of course was far from the truth. But I grew up in a place where we definitely, of course, needed a car to travel everywhere. But I was very thankful to be surrounded by Australian bush and paddocks. Like, there's a lot of space. And it's so funny, like, I'm only 32, but when I think back, I know my upbringing is very different to how kids are being brought up these days, even as I watch my nephew. And I feel really thankful that we really weren't that, you could say, influenced by technology. I remember the days where we would argue over the computer, and we would always take like a 1 hour turn each, and the good old dial-up modem. But always being outside would prevail. We would spend so many hours outside all the time and doing silly things, whether it's like building cubby houses in random trees, and or just, grabbing the air mattress and jumping into a flooded creek. I feel very fortunate for the way I was brought up.
Yeah. So you're 18 and you knew that you needed to go to university, or else you weren't going to be able to come back and do it at a later point almost. So you left home, went to university. What happened like after university?
My university course was perhaps one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. When I left high school, I thought, okay, this is it. I finally get to just study things that are going to feel relevant to what I want to do. And through university, I felt like I was the odd sheep out. I was very interested in sports photography. And throughout those 3 years, I just felt like no one else could relate to what I wanted to do. And I always felt this pressure of like, well, Krystle, maybe you don't know what you want to do. You need to experiment. And I was very open to that initially, but after a while, I was like, no, I know what I want to do. Just let me pursue this passion. And so throughout university, I was seeking out mentorship, and I was working with photographers from the Sydney Morning Herald and Getty Images. And so when it came to the end of the university, I had already started working in the industry that I decided I needed to leave Brisbane, move to Sydney, because that's where the action was happening. And so I went straight into working for News Limited and the Sunday Telegraph, and also Agence France Presse. And so I spent the first few years of my career documenting the big events, whether it was the rugby league, the cricket, you name it. I wanted the thrill of what it was like to run the sidelines at these big events.
So how did the travel come about? How did that start to become more about what you were doing?
Well, with that newspaper work that I was doing, typically, at a minimum, I was getting at least one shift a week, so therefore I could pay my bills. And then some weeks I'll get 2, maybe 3. But no matter what, no matter how busy I got with that work, I always had many days spare. And I don't know what it was, I don't know what made me make this decision, but I started reaching out and I wanted to go document rock climbing or surfing or mountain biking. And so I was always researching different competitions that I could go to start building a network. And over the 4 years that I was based in Sydney, I was slowly building up an adventure network. And what made me, I guess what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost like a light bulb going off in my head. It got to 2011. I had become so disinterested in my work with the papers. I didn't feel the ability to be creative. I felt like it was actually influenced me in the wrong way of my lifestyle. And the adventure stuff, however, was growing on the other side, and it gave me complete freedom. I wasn't competing against 20 other photographers on the sidelines, or I had no editors calling me up on the phone screaming at me to meet deadlines. And the adventure world, it was just myself and the athletes and Mother Nature. And I really love that freedom, that creativity. And so over the years, of course, my curiosity just started to extend a little bit more and more. And of course, I did quite a bit of travel just domestically, whether it was just driving outside of Sydney or going interstate. And then bit by bit, the trips started to happen. I took myself off to Fiji to go shoot some ocean swimming, and I took myself to Nepal, and so each year it was just the one trip, and then it became 2 trips, and then 3, and then now it's now it's a little insane. It's actually probably too much now. But yeah, I guess that's how the travel began.
I love it. I mean, I know that you spent a month in the Arctic with like 23 base jumpers. Tell us more about that. What was that like?
That was going back to 2010, and it was my first real expedition. And I just remember being really excited, but also probably really not having any clue what I was getting myself into. But again, I was just craving certain opportunities to get away from Australia and just see more of the world, and of course, just find that sort of true, gritty, raw adventure. And so when the invite came up through a friend, of course, I began saving every single dollar possible to make sure I could finance my own way onto this trip. And heading to the Arctic, I mean, it is just absolutely spectacular. I think I've always just been drawn to these really bleak, vast sort of landscapes, and I think there's so much beauty to be captured in that. And when I got there, I was certainly thrown in the deep end. I had never done any mountaineering before. I had no gun experience, and here I was camping in polar bear territory. But it's still probably one of the best trips I've ever done. It was just phenomenal to be in such a different environment for a month and really be pushed to the extremes, particularly with the cold, of course. And then the images that I was able to capture gave me a new platform to work with, that when I wanted to establish myself with magazines such as National Geographic, I was able to show work that did grab their attention.
So how did you prepare for heading out to the Arctic for a month, and how does it even work with like your camera equipment? Because I know, like, well, not, I don't know, but like, you know, when you sometimes, when like your phone gets cold and it like shuts down, so you've got to keep your phone like close to your body to keep it warm. Does that work the same way with like cameras, or, you know, how does it even work when you're out there and you're trying to get the shot, but also you're dealing with these extremes, especially in the extremes of temperature?
Well, the main concern is, of course, the batteries. The camera itself is fine. It's just the batteries. So I would always keep batteries in my pockets, or with hand warmers inside the pocket as well, just to keep the warmth in them. Because once the battery gets cold, of course, that's when the power starts to die. But the camera itself held up fine. And the thing you have to be careful of is that if you take your camera into your jacket or into your sleeping bag, or even a case where there's like some sort of heater, like a fire or whatever the case be, and it can cause condensation in the camera, because from extreme heat to cold is not a good thing. So it's okay for the cameras for themselves to be cold, but the batteries is, of course, the crucial element. But it held up pretty good. I mean, it's funny, as I work as a photographer guide with National Geographic in Antarctica. And of course, people always hit me up with those questions. And the technology in cameras have come so far, and it's really not that big of a concern anymore. It's just, if you're in very cold places, just always keep a spare battery in a pocket close to your chest or somewhere where it's going to be warm, and just be ready to swap things out. And even the battery in the camera, when it goes freezing cold and you think, okay, it's dead, there's nothing left, it's amazing the amount of times I put that dead battery in my pocket, and once there's a bit of warmth back in it, there's actually still quite a lot of power left in it.
Yeah. So what is it like dealing or going to Antarctica or to the Arctic on these adventures, or these trips and these moments, and you're trying to capture an image? Are you going knowing sort of the type of shots that you want to get, or is it very much sort of dependent on what happens when you get there?
I would say most of the time it's very dependent on what happens. I mean, I certainly have established a career where it's a mix of both. I present myself as a documentary photographer, but occasionally I have come up with certain concepts that I've collaborated with athletes to create a very specific vision. But for the expeditions in particular, I like to come in with almost no idea what I'm going to do, because I think sometimes just through the spontaneity of the situation, something amazing will happen. And as a mentor always taught me, is be prepared for the unexpected. And yeah, that's how I prefer to be. But sometimes it is fun to come up with certain ideas, but it can also be dangerous, because it's easy to become very one-sided and have the blinders up for other opportunities that might happen in front of the lens. So yeah, there's always pros and cons, no matter how we approach certain things. But when it does come to the expeditions and such, I think it's really important to come in with a journalistic nature about it.
What's the biggest challenge when you're out on these expeditions?
I mean, there's lots of challenges, because it can range anything from being in very, hostile or challenging temperatures for a start. Also, actually, I was about to say being disconnected, but I love being disconnected. I mean, any excuse to put my auto email on and just not have a care in the world for any technology or connectivity to the modern world. I just love those opportunities, because they are definitely becoming harder and harder to come by. But another big challenge in particular is probably group dynamics. It's so important to try to go with friends, but even in that, in those cases, I've definitely have clashed with friends, and it's tough, because until you're on the trip, you never know what someone's true personality is going to be like, and especially under pressure. That's when I feel like a lot of true character is always revealed, and it's hit and miss. I've definitely had some atrocious trips where it has just been painful, because it's really mentally and emotionally draining to be dealing with that. And of course, I've had great trips where when everyone does get along, it is magical. It really is.
I mean, just talking about like group dynamics, because, a lot of people go in groups or go as part of a team. And like you said, it can be sort of mentally and emotionally draining. I mean, how do you handle that when you are out on these expeditions in a small group, having to deal with whatever situations are coming up? I mean, do you have any tactics or tips that you use?
I mean, early in my career, I really had no tactics. I did not know how to handle that. I perhaps had this blind assumption that everyone gets along and it's always going to be okay. But of course, I was being thrown into these very challenging situations. And in my younger 20s, I did not have the ability to communicate clearly. And even into my later 20s, it's just been step by step learning each time from each situation. Okay, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? And most of the time, it's probably based on different people coming in with different expectations. I would say nowadays I do feel a lot more confident in being able to communicate clearly, but also finding those right relationships with certain athletes that I do work very well with, just because of now built up time and experience together. But I'd say the biggest key for anyone who is doing this, I mean, you don't even have to be a photographer or an adventure thing. It's just any part of your life when you start to clash with others, the biggest thing you can do is just have really open and honest conversations and talk about expectations and what the other wants out of the situation. And I think sometimes those conversations can be hard, but generally that is the best way to solve anything in those situations.
Tell me what it was like going to Pakistan to go paragliding. What was happening there?
I had some friends who are some of the world's best paragliders, and by chance, I had met Horatio Lorenz in Nepal on that trip I did many years ago. And as we met on this trip and I was taking a few photos, he had told me about his dream about going to Pakistan. And again, my curiosity and just desire to see the world, I was like, well, you got to keep me posted. I would love to come along and document something like this. And as we stayed in touch, I then met Tom de Dolodor and Hernan Patoko. And the three of them had this dream about trying to break the world altitude record when it came to paragliding. And the only place to do that was in northern Pakistan, thanks to the Karakoram Range and just having the right recipe with huge mountains and certain updrafts with thermals and cloud base. And yeah, so taking off for the first time in 2011, I was definitely not terrified. I was excited to go, but I was also very concerned about, well, wait a minute, as a Western woman, how do I dress? Like I always want to respect the cultures that I go visit. So the last thing I want to do is be dressing what would be considered disrespectful to them. And I remember being at Thailand, the Bangkok airport, and as I'm lining up for the flight, I was like, oh, do I cover my hair, for example? And I try to do as much research as I can, but I really couldn't find much online at that time. And when I lined up, I got this shock where I saw a Pakistani woman dressing in very modern clothes, such as tight jeans and tops. And I was like, oh, I've got nothing to worry about. So I was definitely wearing loose clothing and doing my best to, of course, be respectful. And I love Pakistan. I've met some of the kindest people I've ever met. And just the hospitality blew my mind. And of course, the terrain, particularly when you get to the north, it is just phenomenal. Like some of the roads just carving in and out of the mountainside beside these raging rivers. It was just, yeah, I'm in love with Pakistan. And I went back again in 2016, and I'm sure I will find another way to go back. It's just, sometimes it's hard to describe, but if you can imagine just standing in this green, somewhat luscious valley, and then you're surrounded by 6,000 to 8,000 meter peaks. I think it's one of the most incredible landscapes I've ever seen anywhere in this world.
Mm. Are there many women doing like adventure sports photography?
When I first started, there certainly were fewer, and thankfully the tide has been changing bit by bit, and I see a lot more women wanting to get into this industry. What's quite amazing to hear, and Sadie Coria, a photo editor with National Geographic, had told me, or asked me actually, she's like, Krystle, why is it that there are more female war photographers than there are female adventure photographers? And I honestly couldn't answer the question because I just don't know. I don't know why that is. And even now, I mean, people still throw that question at me. And if anything, it does get very frustrating to hear the question, Krystle, what's it like to be a female adventure photographer? And I get it. I do get it, but at the same time, I don't, because for me, I see myself as a photographer and as an artist, and I want it to be purely based on my work. And it's funny because, like, when I look at my colleagues who are typically male, they never ask the question, well, what's it like to be a male photographer? And so I'm hoping to try and change this conversation. But of course, it is really important to help encourage other females that it is possible to get into the industry. It is not just a male dominated industry. There is plenty of room for women to get into this, especially if that's where their passion lies. And it is really nice to see more women get into this. And if anything, it's just simply encouraging that, yes, it is possible. Of course, it's hard work. It takes time. I think that's the biggest thing with any passionate career. It's a lot of patience, a lot of persistence. But yeah, I see the tide changing. And of course, I do want to talk about the subject of female representation in the industry, but I'm sort of walking that fine line between not trying to treat it like tokenism, that it is the norm and it is welcomed. But of course, with anything, it just takes time for things to change.
I'd love to hear more about, your semi-nomadic lifestyle. I mean, you said you've been away or been traveling for like 11 months. You spent like 9 days at home. What is that really like?
Oh, yes. It's not the easiest subject to talk about with certain friends who don't understand this lifestyle. It's because, oh, geez, even my mum, she has said to me, oh, Krystle, it's such the life to just be traveling around the world. And I was like, whoa, Mum. You just told me the other week that you wish I had more of a life because you see how tired I am and how hard I'm working. So even those who are closest to me still have a bit of a misconstrued idea about what it's really like. And so it's definitely, yes, I still get excited by the destination, and I still love engaging with the world around me and having the camera as this wonderful excuse to take me to places that I never dreamed I would ever visit. And the problem is it's typically the transit. I find airports very overrated, and of course sitting on planes, and it's exhausting. I'm just stuck in this, I'm basically in perpetual motion, and it's hard because I created this momentum. And this year I'm actually trying to make a very conscious change to this lifestyle and actually slow it down, because I actually don't feel like I'm creating that much anymore, because I'm always tired and I'm always moving, and I desperately miss having a home and having a base and some sort of stability. So I'm trying to reset the balance. And I think for a few years, it's what I had to do. It was what I had to do to get to where I am now. And now that I've got to this chapter, like anything, I think it's important for everyone to always reassess whether it's, I don't know, I think every year is always a good check-in point. But yeah, and people ask me, well, do you still get jet lag? It's like, oh God, of course I do. I mean, no one, in my opinion, is immune to jet lag. And then with the couch surfing, because of course one friend's like, well, geez, Krystle, how do you afford it? It's like, well, I'm not booking hotels. I rarely stay in hotels. Typically I'm always couch surfing, or earlier in the days, I was definitely sleeping a lot more in my car or camping and such. But now that I have quite a network around the world, I've got, wonderful friends who love to host me, whether it's on the couch or a spare bedroom. But sometimes the challenge with that is that I'm always in someone else's space. I think the biggest sacrifice to a nomadic lifestyle is the lack of privacy. And of course, I love using couch surfing as an excuse to see friends and spend quality time with them. But there are certain times where my character or personality is quite introverted, and I definitely feel that I can actually recharge a lot easier if I can actually just simply shut off the world and not speak to anyone for whether it's a few hours or a few days. Yeah, there is a lot of challenges, and I get very sick and tired of social media and people trying to push out this wanderlust attitude. And yes, there are beautiful perks to it, but I just don't like it when people paint an unrealistic picture and make people feel as if they're not living, the perfect life. It's no matter what we do, no one's life is better and no one's life is worse. It's just different, and that's it.
Yeah, you said something very interesting that you're reassessing and you're going to be sort of slowing down a little bit. How do you reassess? Like how do you figure that out? I mean, is there a format that you go through, or is it a set of serious questions that you ask yourself, or is it just quiet time for reflection?
It's a mix of everything, to be honest. I definitely don't tell myself, right, every New Year's I'm going to look back on the year and make a resolution or something like that. If anything, thankfully I'm surrounded by some really dear friends who I think we always owe it to each other to just check in on how we are actually doing. And of course, it's great to find those friends who are willing to be very honest and blunt as well, because I think sometimes we just get sort of sucked into some vortex and suddenly life just sort of starts blurring by. And it's like being stuck in a bad relationship, for example. You look back and think, oh, God, I could have ended that way sooner. But when you're sort of stuck inside, it's hard to see out. And time can just scoot on by so fast. But yeah, it's definitely, friends checking in. For me, I guess in quiet times, I do reflect for sure. And even though I will assess, of course, sometimes making change isn't easy. It's taken me a year and a half to try and actually alter this momentum. And I've had friends say, well, just stop now. Just stop. And it's like, no, it's not that easy. I can't just give up all my work and stop because I don't have a rental situation to go to or a home or anything like that. And then, of course, this is my income. This is my livelihood. And so it's not easy some days, that's for sure. But all I can say is I've reached a point where I guess through a certain chain reaction of events, I just feel that it's right to change the hustle that I've been going through and refocus my career in a new chapter, which of course I'm still doing adventure photography and directing. But what I want to do is be able to work on bigger projects. And to do so, I need the time and the capacity to actually design the logistics or the pitch decks behind those projects.
Could you just describe what the past year, where you've been, like what you've been doing, or just the past couple of months, sort of so how often you've been flying, where you've been flying to, sort of thing. To give people an idea of what it's been like.
Let's see. I'm just trying to think how far to go back because here's a great example. When I was working as the Nat Geo photo guide down in Antarctica, so this was going back just to the end of January. So I was down there for 3 weeks, and typically if the conversation's not flowing as easy at the dinner table, the number one question I'm always asked to create conversation is, well, what's next? And so I start telling them, it's like, right, I'm doing this project and I'm going here and here. And by the time I finish telling my story, they're like, oh, wow, so that must be your year plan. It's like, no, that's my next 2 months. A lot of people have a hard time trying to fathom what it is that I do. And so after I left Antarctica, I had returned back to the States just for, how long was I back? Maybe a week or two. And I was just shooting skiing. Oh, that's right. I came back to shoot some skiing. And so I flew up from Chile to Salt Lake City. I shot a bit of skiing in Salt Lake City, up to Jackson Hole, came back, quick ski mission to Nevada, came back, flew out to London. I spent a couple of weeks in the UK countryside trying to pursue athletes for a project, and I was getting shut down by horrific weather. And then I took off to Sweden for 5 days for a side trip, came back to England. I spent another 10 days or so, and then I flew back to the States. And then in the space of about 3 weeks, I traveled from Utah up to Montana for a ski story. And then I went up through BC to Nelson, Revelstoke, Whistler, Squamish, back down through Seattle, Portland, all around sort of central Oregon, and then back to Utah, but via Salt Lake, Moab. Yeah, so that took me up until the end of March. And by early April, I flew back. Where did I fly next? Sorry, I have to recount these stories.
I think that gives like a pretty good example of how crazy busy your life has been over the past couple of months.
Yeah,
Would you describe yourself as quite sort of introverted then?
I'm a bit of both. I definitely love situations where, for example, when I go to a film festival and I feel like I can be quite extroverted, and I love, hanging out in the bar and telling, ridiculous stories and having a good old time with friends. But then I find after these events, I just want to retreat and be completely introverted and shut off. It's a balance of both. I definitely can find actually myself recharging when I am connected to people and just chatting. But then I guess it's a bit of hot and cold. It just depends on my mood. Definitely need alone time, and I just need privacy because it's nice. I'm sure anyone could relate to this. It's so nice to come into your own space, and if you want to feel angry or if you want to feel sad or happy, you can do so without any judgment or any other energy in the room to deal with.
Where do you go to relax, to get away from it all?
Still trying to figure that out, to be honest. It changes. It's tough because when I come home, I mean, I guess if I was home for longer, maybe that would be a different answer. But I find that I'm usually coming home just to do, whether it's medical checkups or just doing all my typical chores, whether it's getting a massage or the dentist or you name it. So it becomes a bit hectic, and then of course seeing family and friends. And so right now I'm in Sydney. On Sunday I take off to London for 48 hours. I'll then continue on to the States to go storm chasing through Tornado Alley. And after that trip, I've carved out 12 days in Hawaii to see a friend. And that is my time off because I know I'll have the ability with her to go free diving every day and just to chill out because I won't be there for any clients. I will take photos for myself, but I have no one who is requesting special imagery of me. And I think that's what I have to do. I just have to go to certain locations that I know that I have particularly the time to do something active, whether it's just free diving for myself every day or going to other locations where I could be hiking or skiing or climbing and so forth.
When did you get into free diving?
I've been growing up on the Sunshine Coast. I was always close to the ocean, but it wasn't until 2013 that I finally found the opportunity to enroll into my first freediving course, and I love it. And that's the hard thing with this nomadic lifestyle is that I don't have the ability to keep up with these sports or be present because the travel, it just gets in the way. And so over the years now, I feel like I could have progressed a lot further had I had some sort of base or stability. So it's been more important for me now to carve out more time. And of course, I'm sure people are thinking, well, wait a minute, you're an adventure photographer. You're out there documenting athletes and all these extreme things. And it's been tough because as a photographer, you sort of get put into this role where you are not only just the photographer and expected to keep up or if not be quicker than the athletes, it's also I tend to become the voice between the athletes and the brands. And I find myself in these planning positions. So I'm doing a lot of emailing and phone calls and back and forth. And so then it's like, how on earth do you find time to even train? And yeah, so it's important for me to get back to the things that I love to do personally, so freediving, and carve out these times of year where I feel like I can progress again.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you are on the road this much, like how do you keep yourself fit and healthy and well, like both mentally and physically?
I would say, I mean, I'm definitely struggling, only because I've just simply said yes to too many things, and it's resulted in feeling very overwhelmed. So I would say right now I'm probably in the poorest state of health that I've ever been in. I just feel stressed. I'm tired. The other day when my mum dropped me off at the train station so I could get to the airport, she said, "Oh, geez, Krystle, like, it looks like you have a black eye." And it's like, no, I'm just so tired and sleep deprived. It looks like I have black eyes right now. Yeah, it's not been easy. And of course, one would say it's like, well, better time management. Of course, if I was as an incredible talent at time management, I'm sure I would be doing a lot better, but I'm simply not. I like to procrastinate. I like to get distracted, and I'll go carve out time to see friends because that's very important to me. So sometimes I think, well, maybe I shouldn't have gone out tonight for dinner with friends. Maybe I should have gone to the climbing gym instead. But it's really tough because I know I'm not in Sydney very often. And I feel that if I don't put in the effort to see friends, then I would lose all of those connections. But then it's also having the ability to put up the right boundaries and actually be selfish and make sure that I am taking care of myself. I guess all I could say to those who are listening is that, yeah, I struggle. And I could confidently say that most people that I know that are considered at the top of the industry are in similar boats. We're all shit shows. I think everyone's a shit show, but sometimes people just don't show that transparency or open up about it. But yeah, I think now that I'm 32 and I still want to continue to pursue this lifestyle and being an adventure photographer, is that I definitely need to create a better health regime for myself, because the older you get, the harder it is to simply just rock up and think that I can just hike straight up that mountain. I'm starting to feel it more and more of like, if I'm not fit, I'm huffing and puffing a lot more and slowing down the group, and that's not okay. So yeah, I have a few things to figure out. The summary of that conversation.
Yeah, I think, sometimes people are just doing their best. I think it just sometimes almost gets tougher and tougher as you get older because life almost gets in the way. And, people can talk about having a morning routine or, fitting in like their health and exercise. And sometimes it can just be so, so challenging. So thank you for being so transparent. I think it's really useful for people to be able to hear this. You said you do have a base. I mean, do you have a home anywhere, or do you go back to your parents' place, or where do you go back to when you go back to Sydney?
Well, no, Sydney, I left Sydney at the end of 2011. So I haven't, I just come here to visit now or for work commitments. I'm back on the Sunshine Coast since then. And for about 6 years, all my belongings were in boxes in a shipping container on my grandparents' property. And for a few years, that worked just fine. But I started finding myself coming back home more and more. And suddenly it was like, this isn't okay. But I didn't know what to do about it because I still was never around. There's no way I could justify rent if I was away for so many months of the year. And so I kept putting up with it. But it wasn't until basically early last year, some really dear friends of mine, they'd been offering me for years to move in with them. But I was like, no, I can't, because I just can't afford to pay so much rent if I'm not there. And they've known me since I was a kid, and they said, look, Krystle, we don't want a housemate, but we know that you're never around, so please let us help you. And so nowadays I do get to go back to a room that I can call mine, and thankfully it's a very generous situation where I just pay rent when I'm there, and when I'm not, they don't expect anything out of me.
Oh, you've got some great friends. That's awesome.
I mean, it's so generous. It's saving me. And I'm sure one day I'm going to find a way to pay them back in one way or another. But that's thankfully what friends can, like, while we are there for each other. I mean, it's like family. You just help each other as best you can. And for example, when I started in this industry, or when I started traveling full time as an adventure photographer and trying to establish myself, I was broke. I spent so many years being so damn broke, and I never had savings. That was a magical wish that I thought just never existed until, pretty close until I turned 30. And so when I first began, it was definitely tough and it was tight. And there were situations where I rock up and I would just hope so hard that my friends were going to offer me either to cook dinner or to even shout me dinner or a drink, just because I was struggling. And I just knew in time that when I got to a more successful position, I would find a way to pay that back. And for sure I did, because I just wanted to. It's not a case of owing someone. You're not friends because you owe each other something, but you do your best to just, to give back, basically.
And I'm going to ask you the question which you probably don't want to be asked, but what are the adventures or what are the challenges that's on like your bucket list that you want to take photos of? Is there this dream bucket list or this dream challenge which you think, do you know what, I want to go there, I want to take photos of that or do that?
Oh, sure. I mean, that list it never ends. And I'm sure up until my last breath, there is still always going to be somewhere that I wanted to go. And so there's a few destinations that are very high on my list at the moment. And certainly I crave stories, and I really crave trying to seek out the right stories to tell. And that can be anywhere. It can be local or it could be international or anywhere. But yeah, certainly the curiosity is still very much there, because from what I've seen already, I just know I still have only scratched the surface. I know when people hear me talk about my travels, I still feel like I've barely done anything because there is just so many wonderful rabbit holes to go down.
This might be a little bit of a controversial question, but I'd just be interested in your thoughts on this. Because everyone has iPhones these days and so many people are on Instagram, sharing photos, and everyone thinks that they're a photographer. How is it more challenging in your industry now because so many people are going out and recording and taking photos and sharing them? Is that challenging working in the adventure sports space as a photographer when there are so many other people who are maybe doing it for free?
Oh, look, I mean, certainly I try to encourage younger photographers to value themselves. And there will always be certain situations that, yeah, for sure, I did certain things for free. Not too many, but sometimes you have to do that. And it's a layered question to answer. And I'm just trying to figure out a way to condense this. But the thing is, like, anyone has the right to call themselves a photographer if they hold a device that has the ability to capture an image. Now, I can already hear a few people being like, bullshit, like you cannot say such a thing. But the thing is, what distinguishes a photographer from a great photographer is the ability to be a storyteller. So sure, anyone can take a photo, that's fine. But not everyone knows how to tell a story. And when I look at Instagram, I just see so many images that are nothing. It's just a pretty image, and it doesn't engage and it doesn't resonate. Mind you, the platform doesn't exactly give us the right space to actually really absorb. It's basically a visual distraction. But when I think to the images that stay in my mind, well, there's very few. And when I think about them, I'm like, wow, like that is a great image. And, images still very much have the power and the ability to just blow people away and change the world too. I really mean that wholeheartedly. And so when people think, oh, well, it's too hard, like there's too many photos being produced. Well, I can tell you, in my blunt opinion, there's a lot of shit photos being created. But of course, when I say that, it's subjective. What I might not like or engage with, it might mean the world to someone else. So I think it's important for even me to remind myself of that notion. I mean, art is forever subjective. But I think I don't fear that I'm going to be ousted or it's going to be too hard. I just know that if there's more competition, I simply just have to work harder, and I have to find a way to continue to distinguish myself from the crowds. And a lot of people, I believe, do not have simply the dedication or the willingness to take gambles, because a lot of people fear the concept of failure. And for me, by failing time and time again, I'm sure I'll continue to fail many times throughout my career, has always given me the greatest lessons I've ever learned. And ultimately I use that to excel myself. But yeah, I think photography is still in a very healthy place, and there are still great photographers out there. And sure, the competition is tougher, but it's like anything. I think we just have to be able to evolve and adapt.
And Krystle, what advice would you have for other women out there who maybe do want to step outside their comfort zone? They either want to take more photos, or they want to go down the adventure sports route, or even they want to do, lead a more nomadic lifestyle and really to follow their dreams. So I don't know if there's final words of inspiration or a mantra that you follow or a quote that's particularly, stuck with you?
I think, as I said earlier in this interview, is that the simple thing to think about is that it is possible. And there's no need to ask yourself why. If anything, it's why not? Like, why not take off? Or why not make a film? Or why not, take photos? Because if you do fail, it's really not the worst thing in the world, because you can always start again, or you just keep trying. It's really that simple in my mind. I guess I am thankful that I was brought up with a very much of a stubborn son of a bitch attitude. And so I become quite stubborn in my ways, and I don't have a plan B. I've only ever had a plan A, and without a backup plan, it just forces me to make plan A work. And I remember when I first took off in this nomadic lifestyle, and of course, in particular, my female friends who voiced their concern of like, oh, Krystle, like sleeping in your car by yourself, like it's dangerous. I think you should reconsider. And I just thought, no, I'm doing this. I don't care. Like, of course, I accept there's certain dangers with that, but I'm not going to know or learn unless I try and just do it. So, yeah, even this lady that I was doing a online course with a few ladies in England, and one of them, she said, Krystle, I feel like I'm just too old to do this, and I really want to make this film, but I just feel like, where do I even start? And my advice to her was just fucking do it. And she took that to heart, and she's did it. So, oh man, I think it just comes to one, I think you have to question what is actually holding yourself back, and is it actually a valid reason, and why is it holding you back? Questioning what is actually holding you back from doing this, and then just doing things one step at a time. I mean, no one builds this overnight, and building a network, the publications, all that, whatever it is you want to do, even like taking off overseas, is simply one step at a time, and just building on that bit by bit. And so when you do look back after a year or 5 years or 10 years, it's quite amazing to see what you can build over time.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I love that so much. It's that patience and persistence, and why not? Absolutely. Krystle, Where can people find, more of your work and follow along with your photography?
Probably the most up-to-date is actually Instagram, even though I just, oh God. But it is it is a fun platform, and I do like to engage with it. And so on Instagram, I'm just at Krystle J. Wright. I then have my website, KrystleWright.com.
Krystle, I'll make sure I put all of the links to your Instagram, to your website, so people can go and find you and follow on with your beautiful pictures. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast to share more of your story, and keep taking those stunning, stunning photos.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode with Krystle Wright on the Tough Girl Podcast. I really do appreciate your time, and thank you so much for listening. To find out more about Krystle and to get the show notes, then please do go visit toughgirlchallenges.com. If you go and visit the website, you can find more information about me, some of the different challenges that I've done, the books that I've written, as well as the blog. And also all of our previous guests are on there. So the Tough Girl Podcast was started on the 4th of August, 2015 with 4 episodes. We're now up to 209 episodes. There's hours and hours of content available on there, and you can pick and choose which episodes you want to listen to. So if you're interested in cycling, running, hiking, mountaineering, swimming, there will be a Tough Girl Podcast episode for you. Just tell one friend about the Tough Girl Podcast. That is the most powerful way that you can help support my mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media. If you've got a friend who's running a marathon or training for a triathlon or just wants to get more fit and active, tell them to listen to the Tough Girl Podcast. New episodes are coming every Tuesday at 7 a.m. UK time, with bonus episodes coming on a Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. The bonus episodes don't necessarily come out every Thursday, but if you subscribe, it will mean that you won't miss out on any of them. Have an awesome day wherever you are, whatever you are doing. Give it your all, give it 110%, and I'll be back with you next Tuesday for another episode. All right, take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.